there was one girl there who was sharing very openly about her attraction to women, her experience dating women in these like spiritual lessons. And I was very intrigued by her. And I found myself journaling about her a lot. And I was like, what is it? Why am I so drawn to her? Is it because I'm like jealous? Like, is it because I'm intrigued? And then I was like, I feel like there's this kind of like attraction. And then I was like, is it because there aren't really any men here? Like, I really had all this time to just really process everything. And I basically realized after like 2 weeks, because that's the other thing, it was only a 3-week experience, but it was so immersive that it was, a lot happened in a short amount of time. But I realized after 2 weeks, I was like, I'm in love with her.
Welcome to Openly Spoken. I'm your host, Celia Antonio, growth mindset and mindfulness mentor who loves to lead with quantum self-love. In this podcast, you'll get to hear real and unfiltered stories covering topics around spirituality, womanhood, healing, love, relationships, and more. This podcast is for spiritual, ambitious women who want to live a life that they are in love with and who are looking for a more aligned way to do things, because the world loves to tell us women what we, quote, should be. So think of this podcast and my work as your guide to bring you back home to your truth and what makes you uniquely magical. Feel free to connect with me over on Instagram at selfexpressbabe, where I periodically share video content from the podcast and where my DMs are open for you to connect with me. I'm so grateful that you chose to listen in today, and I invite you now to set an intention, sit back, relax, and receive the transmission coming to you through Openly Spoken. Thank you for being here. Now let's dive in. Hello, welcome back to Openly Spoken. This is going to be the last episode of Pride Month. This has been a really fun month, a really eye-opening month. I've learned so many things, and I'm very excited to bring you this week's guest, Maria Eilersen. She is someone that has been on the podcast twice before. You can find her on the first and second episode of season 2, where we talk about PR. And Maria Eilersen is an award-winning PR coach. She's a yoga teacher, and she's the founder of Be Conscious PR. And she empowers heart-centered entrepreneurs to get the recognition they deserve in the media so that they can reach millions of people and make a bigger impact. With over a decade of experience working across agency, freelance, and in-house roles in the industry, including heading up global PR for a multi-million-dollar travel company, as well as 350 plus hours of yoga teacher training under her belt, Maria's approach is both grounded in experience and her uniquely conscious view of PR. She's been featured in places like Business Insider, Yahoo News, Pop Sugar, and more, and was awarded Europe's 2021 Impactful Founder of the Year by Acquisition International. And in this little chat that we have, it's a very casual chat. We went on for a while, very fun. It's always very fun to have Maria on. You're welcome back anytime, Maria. And we went on a huge little tangent where we talked about kind of like yoga philosophy and relating it to discovering yourself and your identity. We talked about the male gaze. We talked about how coming out isn't something that is just like one big event. It kind of just, you come out and then you have to come out daily to everyone around you, which is something that I've also heard from other guests. So that's something that I didn't even think about before sitting down and doing these conversations, doing these episodes. And this is just kind of like a very casual episode where I would invite you to kind of just sit with some of the topics that we bring up. Especially, I found it very interesting to talk about the male gaze and to really reflect on like how you have maybe played into that. And yeah, I hope that you like this episode. I also really hope you like Maria's story. Maria shared her coming out story, and when she shared it, I had tears in my eyes. It was such a beautiful story. I hope you enjoy it. So go ahead and grab a cup of tea, go find somewhere comfy to sit, and let's get ready to have a chat with Maria. Amazing, we're recording. Welcome back, Maria. I am so excited to have you on Openly Spoken for the third time, especially since we are going to be celebrating Pride Month.
Yay! So excited to be back on, and happy Pride.
Mm-hmm. And I'm excited to hear more. I'm excited to hear more like personal, a little more like personal side of you, the more like just to get to know you deeper, you know, and share that with our listeners. And also hopefully this whole month, everything that we share, all the stories that we share, helps at least one person out there who is struggling. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for creating this space and inviting us onto your platform. Because I know from personal experience, which we will definitely get into, representation is just so incredibly important. And I wish there were podcasts like this when I was younger, figuring everything out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had another, I think actually all of the guests have mentioned that representation is important. And then I've kind of been like, oh my gosh, am I like showing enough variety of the community in this month? Because it's like just all women. I just had all lesbians on. Like there's no one else. There's no one who's like bisexual, no one who is gender fluid, no one who is like all these other things. There's no one on here that was trans. But this is who I have access to for now.
Well, you have a bisexual on now, so
yay.
There's a bit more representation that way. But okay, you know, cool. it's a little goes a long way, right? It's like what we talk to. Well, I'm sure you talk to your clients about too. Like when you're conscious and when you want to do good things in the world, it's really easy to almost get this paralysis of like, well, I want to do all the things and I can't do all the things, and then you don't do anything. And providing a platform for queer women does go a long way, because within the LGBTQI plus community, there's, you know, obviously there's so much diversity, and we want to try to represent everyone. But as one person, you can't possibly represent everyone. And queer women for a long time have been erased. So you're doing something by making us visible.
Yeah. Awesome. And we had your partner on, Raquel, and she also mentioned this thing about like women being erased. And she mentioned how within the trans community, there's more representation of trans women because they were born a man, but there isn't as much representation of trans men. And she mentioned like, because, you know, they were born as a woman, so their identity is just like completely erased. It's very interesting, like what I get to learn from all of you sharing with me. So yeah. So let's dive in. I would love to hear, of course, your story and everything that you've been through with like coming out even to yourself, to your family, your whole journey with dating. And then I also know that you are a yoga teacher, and I've touched on this just a tiny bit in some of the other episodes I've recorded for this month, but hopefully we have some time to like talk about it a little bit deeper, of this kind of like weird, I don't know what the word is for it, like this kind of like weird thing in yoga where like yoga is like nonviolence and like all about love and stuff, but there's this like non-inclusiveness when it comes to the LGBTQIA plus community with yoga, like where there are some studios like you don't feel safe to go there and things like that. So those are the things I would love to talk about. But also
let's get into it.
Yes, I would also like to like offer if there's anything that's like on your heart besides what I've mentioned that you want to talk about, we can invite that into the space too.
Sounds good.
Okay, Cool. So where do we begin?
Yeah, I hear you. I also feel like I've been set up really well for recording this episode, in part because I'm actually working on a piece for like an article about the evolution of pride. But it also has gotten me into that like state of writing, you know, like back when you're in uni and you're like, or in college and you're like in the place of writing. And then when you kind of go out of it, you're a little bit like disconnected from the world. So I'm like, okay, now we're in speaking mode, not in writing mode. But I feel like I'm in that headspace of talking about pride and queer issues. And I actually just finished a brilliant book that I would love to recommend to readers by Jen Winston called it's called Greedy, Notes from a Bisexual Who Wants Too Much. And it really affirmed my identity as bisexual, which is something that I have been questioning. What was really comforting in the book was one of the things she talks about is how that whole questioning element and that confusion is such a natural part of being bisexual because of the conditioning and because of the bi erasure, right? That like, depending on who you are with, like right now I'm with a woman. And so people would guess, you know, or maybe assume that I'm a lesbian versus if I'm with a man, I could pass as straight. And so you're kind of, it's hard to have bisexual representation unless you like, you know, kind of share it or are vocal about it. And then also the biphobia that exists both from the straight community, but also within the queer community. So you kind of like don't ever really feel like queer enough. And then you're like, I can pass as straight, but then I'm like repressing this part of myself. So it is kind of like confusing. And it was just like, I think it just really speaks to just, again, representation and why it's so valuable. Like, it seems like something that people just say over and over again. And maybe if you're not queer, it kind of, you're like, okay, I get it. Or, you know, it doesn't really seem like that big a deal, but it just, you know, especially because I've been questioning, like kind of recently reading this book, it was just like, whoa, like it just feeling seen and feeling like someone is sharing a similar experience. You just go, okay, I am normal. Because one big part of my journey in coming out was a lot around like, am I queer enough? Which is such a, you know, when I talk to my queer friends about it, they're like, that's such a ridiculous idea. Because the whole point of being queer is that you get to just be who you are. Like, you don't have to like fit into, you know, these boxes and stuff. So it's kind of like this paradox, but yeah, it was comforting to read that, like, you know, that's a very common thing for bisexual people. And also like she had all these like interesting stats that I didn't know. And like one of them that stood out was that actually, I think it's only like, I mean, now I don't remember the exact percentage, but maybe it's like only a third of bisexuals are actually out. Like, a lot of people don't share it, which is another reason why, like, okay, so you might actually know a lot of people who are bisexual, but because they're not vocal about it and because maybe they're in a relationship that looks like it's straight, you would never know.
Yeah.
Which just goes to show again why it's so important to like talk about these things.
So this sounds like a recent kind of like discovery for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's been more of like it's what I thought I was originally.
Okay.
And then being in a serious relationship with a woman for so long, and I guess unlearning like all of the conditioning, I started questioning my relationships that I'd had with men. And quite and I think it was really like, it was kind of naturally, like it was naturally happening just by virtue of being with someone who identifies as a lesbian. Just like hearing her thoughts and her experience and stuff, and like questioning some of my stuff. But also because I've been listening, like as part of my journey in general, I've been listening to a lot of like podcasts, and one podcast that's great is called the Coming Out Pod. It's just coming out stories, which are still, you know, so valuable, of all different kinds of people. And so it's very, very representative of the kind of full spectrum, and the whole community. And one episode on that podcast was an interview with this young Gen Z lesbian, something that me and Raquel talk about very often, like, Gen Zs have it so good when it comes to this stuff, which is obviously so easy to say as older. Like obviously they have like,
they have more media to look at. They have more
yeah,
variety in media. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. And if you are in a community where maybe there isn't representation, you can go on the internet and you can find representation in a
Yeah.
way that that wasn't accessible to us. But she talked about this document that's been circulating on TikTok, and it shows the fact that I'm not a Gen Z, the fact that I found out from a podcast about something that was circulating on TikTok. But it's this document, and if you Google it, you'll find it. It's I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it's a document that's basically, it's like really extensive. It's a document that's compiled to help people figure out whether or not they're a lesbian, with a bunch of questions, with a bunch of information. And so there's all this stuff in there about the male gaze, which, I knew about before, and compulsory heterosexuality, which is a term I hadn't heard before, but, obviously makes a lot of sense that we're all born into.
What does that mean? Compulsory heterosexuality is what you said?
Yeah. So we're born into the patriarchy, and we're born into a society where heterosexuality is what is expected. It is what is assumed. It is what is taught, right? Yeah. Like from when we're very, very young, you see like a girl running after a boy. It's like, oh my God, she's got a crush. Like literally from.
Or even like Disney movies,
Disney movies,
storybooks, how it depicts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then like the side note there is that, if then there's a cartoon or something and there's two women characters kissing, then conservatives will like go off and be like, children are too young for this. It's like, well, you have no issue when it's like a boy and a girl, and it's like, yeah. They're like, it's like Minnie Mouse and Mickey Mouse, like they're mice, they're not people. Like they're, but you are giving them, you're sexualizing them, and that's okay. Yeah. Anyway, side note, but yeah, compulsory heterosexuality is that it's very much something that we've been conditioned to perform, right? And so a big section of the document is about that. And so it's asking yourself questions. And there's just all these things in there that I didn't realize were really common. Like apparently this is according to the document, but it's common for lesbians or women who identify as lesbian that they maybe would have crushes on men, but they would typically be men that were inaccessible. So like men in like, actors or like famous people or cartoons, because part of them maybe deep down knew that they didn't actually want to have an experience with a man. And then there was another element in there that was about like attraction, like whether, how do they phrase it? Like you can find someone attractive, but that's different from being attracted to someone. Right? That's something that Raquel and I will talk about, where she'll say, she can find a lot of men really attractive and be like, wow, like that's, but then she's like, but I know I'm a lesbian because I don't want to touch him or get intimate with him, but I can really appreciate, some like how handsome someone is or something like that. And that was I think that was why I was just kind of going through it. I was really like questioning a lot of the relationships. And I think maybe that's where there's this overlap too of, I've lived my life as a straight woman, repressing this part of me, which when we get into my story, I'll give more context to. But it's also quite common for like, it's part of the feminist movement as well. And that like for women to realize how conditioned they've been to perform for the male gaze as well. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. So that's why there's like this added layer that like it wasn't, that's why I think I had to go through that process to really like check, because I think sadly it is quite common. I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of all women, but from my friends, the conversations I've had and my own experiences, like it's quite common to have done things or, been intimate in ways with men that you maybe didn't actually want, but it was kind of like, you felt like it was expected, or it's like more of a performance for what you think you should do versus what you actually want to do. Yeah. And I think that's why it was just kind of it was just a more confusing, complex thing to kind of explore and navigate and understand about myself.
I got tingles when you mentioned that about the male gaze, because I definitely experienced that as well. And it's like this kind of like disempowering experience to go through of where
Yeah.
like what you really want to do, you like hold it back or cage it in. Like I remember, when was this? Maybe like 2010. In 2010, I remember my grandmother like gave me these bras that were like bralettes. And that was before like bralettes like were easy to find in America here. But my grandmother lives in Germany and that's like the norm over there. And I remember like wearing it and I'm like, oh my God, yes, my boobs feel great. But my boyfriend at the time was like, ew, what is that bra? You look like a boy. And like
Oh my God.
was basically like feeding into this like idea of like women have to wear padded push-up bras and like I need to see cleavage and stuff. And like I went through a whole journey in my life of like accepting my little boobs that I love so
Mm,
much. And a huge part of that was this like expectation of like with the male gaze of like men like big boobs, you know, like
yeah.
this like narrative that isn't actually true because there's so many different kinds of people out there. There's so many different kinds of body types out there. And there's so
Hmm.
many different levels of like consciousness out there. You know, like when you're at a certain level of consciousness, like probably doesn't even matter to you what your significant other looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, it's such an interesting thing. Like you bring that up with the bra, because I remember I had a friend, and I think in her early 20s, she had a boyfriend and I never really liked him. And he was like, and then she shared this thing with me. I didn't know him very well because she was living in a different city. But she shared that like he always expected her bra and underwear to match, and she didn't wear her bra, like matching bra and underwear. And I was just like, I was like, that like blew my mind. I'm like, I understood the whole performing for the male gaze and whatever, but the fact that like a man would actually say that out loud, that expectation,
Yeah.
I was just, yeah, no, but I get it. And I mean, there's another great book that I'll recommend, which is Women Don't Owe You Pretty by
Oh,
Florence Gibbons. Great. She's also very young, and it's just like full of feminist theory in there. She herself is, I believe she identifies as bisexual and queer. So there's a whole section on queerness as well, which I loved, which was like, I think that the chapter's name was something like, is it a girl crush or are you queer? And I was like, relate. Because that's another like really common thing is like with attraction to women, at least for me, which apparently, yeah, it's quite common, is like, do I like her? Do I want to be her, or both? You know,
yeah.
because I obviously can also be like, oh wow, I really like that outfit, or like really like that
Mhm.
combination of earrings and that makeup, and then I'll also be like, I'm also attracted to her, and it's like
Mhm.
it's just very different from the attraction to men.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, in that she talks about the male gaze a lot as well, and also talks about how it's really addictive. Like I can find myself still
Yeah.
performing for it,
Yeah.
you know, like
Because you get like
it,
a reward out of it.
yeah. And it's
Mhm.
funny, it's like it's like it's hard to like articulate, but you just know like how to perform in a way to get the attention of a man. And
Mhm.
it's just so fucked up that then, you also, like you said, get this reward. Like it is so addictive. And in the book, she mentions that she had to quit it cold turkey. Like that was the only way. It's like a drug. Like you have to just completely go off of it. But that's the only way you can really figure out like what is me and what I like about me and how I want to express myself and what is me performing to get this attention. Because obviously like it also awards you with certain advantages if you perform for it, because you're doing what is expected of you. So there's just like all these layers to it.
Or like if you work in the service industry, like I used to waitress for a while and like I just remember kind of like I guess the right word is like playing the men so that I can get like more tips.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
like acting differently with the patrons I had that were men because like I knew how to connect at a certain level that would like get me a really good tip.
Well, yeah, exactly. So it's like also, use it to your advantage. But it's like yeah, it's such a, like once you see it, it's like
Yeah.
really hard to unsee it. But I think it's such an important like thing for us to discuss as
Hmm.
women, or just as people who don't identify as men, because it's
Yeah.
it's very much there. And also the privileges obviously that come with being a man, like that's something I don't remember exactly where I heard this, probably from one of the podcasts that I was listening to, but I think what you mentioned about there being a more visibility of trans women versus trans men, part of it is also because once they become trans, like being a trans man, if you can pass as a man, you get awarded the privileges. And I think that's what some trans men have shared, that they're like, whoa, like this privilege thing is really real, because as soon as I transitioned, I started getting all these benefits, and the other way around too, right? That it's like, and that's part of it as well. I mean, I'm no expert. I'm also continually like learning and stuff, and I'm not going to speak on behalf of the trans community, but that was just something that I think was really like worth noting as well.
That's wild.
Yeah, because there are so many layers of privilege, right? Like I have like cisgender privilege. I have like straight passing privilege. Like if I wanted to, I could, let them like completely hide the fact that I'm queer, where for some people they can't do that. So there's all these like layers to it. And that's also something that a lot of the queer texts I've been reading talk about, that like just how important it is for us as queer people to really acknowledge that like it is all of our responsibility, that in order for any queer people to be free, we have to like, everyone needs to be free, which is kind of like plays into that yogic principle or in philosophy as well, right? That like, it's not just about freedom for the few or your personal enlightenment. Like it is, within the community too, there are like degrees of privilege. Like gay white men are the most privileged. And then, there are trans, non-binary people of color. They are more marginalized, and we have to acknowledge that within the community as well. And that was actually one thing that I think really I didn't know until I came out and I started being in the community and like trying to connect and whatever. Like that's when I started learning all those things, because being from the outside, back when I was denying the fact that I was queer, was very like, oh, it just looks like this like happy rainbow family, and it's like it's not, like it's an incredibly diverse group of people that we've just all like slotted into this one category.
One group.
Yeah. Which is why like one thing that I notice like always gets to me is when people are like, oh yeah, I'm going to gay pride. I'm like, it's not just gay. Like I know that that's what it like started out as. I think the very first pride was called like Gay Pride Week, and then it was Christopher Street Gay Pride March. So it did have the word gay in there. Yeah, in New York City. But I learned today in doing my research that it was actually those events in the march was actually organized by a bisexual activist. I was like, interesting. That's not been very visible, but that's like quite important. But yeah, sorry, I feel like I lost my train of thought. So just I'm gonna stop and let you ask me a question, because I'm like, can go in so many different directions. I have so much to say.
Yeah, I love it. I'm here for it all. You did mention a little bit one of the topics I wanted to talk about, and then we'll get into your story about within yoga, how there's this kind of like weird paradox of being like loving everyone and then still within the yoga community. Like I've even experienced this. I used to live in Connecticut very briefly for about 2 years, and seeing the culture there of yoga studios versus like when I lived in Miami Beach was like completely different. You had to have like the Lululemon leggings, and you had to have like your hair and makeup done. Like it was really weird. It was like a completely different world, and I can't even imagine in a space like Connecticut is pretty liberal, but I think it is a red state. But like where I lived was pretty liberal and pretty open. But I can't imagine someone walking in who's like trans and being like accepted within the spaces that I've experienced within yoga, because even like the person I was dating at the time was Hispanic, and even he did not have a good time in Connecticut. Like we had completely opposite experiences. I made all these friends and he had a hard time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure what my question is. I just kind of want to talk about this kind of like contradictory kind of like lesson that we are like within yoga, we are taught to be nonviolent. So ahimsa is like the very first foundation of yoga.
Yeah, and I
There's
think
this.
what's
Mhm.
important to note about ahimsa is also that like non-violence doesn't mean just like not doing violence yourself, but it's also actively helping to protect others against violence, which I think is
Yeah,
what gets left out.
yeah.
It's always like just translated as like, oh, do no harm. But that's also kind of an easy way to just be like, oh, I'm not part of the problem. I'm just going to ignore, and
Mm-hmm.
not speak up for issues
Yeah,
and not use my privilege to speak out and protect, help protect like people who are being harmed. I think that is like a big part of them. Yeah, that's a missing piece.
yeah, so true. And then like, so we have the non-harming, and then we also have this kind of like the whole journey of yoga, in my experience at least, with like my awakening that I had, is it gets you to this kind of like perspective or this like viewpoint where you're like, huh, like this separation between me and like whoever's in front of me, or like me and a cat, or me and a beetle, like is actually an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're all
Yeah.
the exact same. And it's like almost comical to get an objective viewpoint of the human race and see all the little things that we bicker about, whether it's about uh, sexuality, identity, race, even. Like it's really frustrating when
Mm,
you like notice it and you're like, why are we like spending our time doing this when we can like all be living harmoniously?
yeah.
And just like it's like even from the like inner world of the people spreading the hate, like they would even be happier if they can release that hate. Like when you're putting this bad energy, bad, I don't know what a better word to use for it, but like this contractive, sticky energy out.
Judgmental. Yeah.
Yeah, you're also like, that's also playing on in your head, and all your like cells are listening to it. Yeah, I
It's
feel
a
like,
way of living. Like then you judging others also means you're going to judge yourself. Like typically the people who are
yeah,
very judgmental are people who are very judgmental of themselves,
yeah,
right? Like that's kind
yeah.
of you we project things, and that was one of my big learnings in my healing journey was like this whole concept of not taking things personally, because most of the time, even if when someone treats you badly, even if they say things that are personally to you to hurt you, chances are it's still a reflection on them. That doesn't make it okay, but it just helps you be like, oh, I like let go of this idea of like you did something wrong to deserve it. Like, no, you didn't. The
Yeah.
fact that they're treating you that badly means that they are treating themselves really badly and they are really
Hmm.
struggling. And for me, that helped me distance myself from it and also have some compassion and see see that oneness still, because sometimes you can be very like, oh, I'm nothing like that. But when you can have that
Mm,
compassion and zoom out and be like, okay, they are doing, everyone is doing the best they can given the experiences that they've had.
hmm.
And judging and hatred and all these things are really sad things that humans do, but it's like a conditioning, right? And
Yeah,
like
it is.
the brain, like the thoughts we have, the brain believes like if you say you're having a bad day, well, you're going to look at all the reasons why it's bad. And if you think certain people are bad, you're going to look for all the reasons why they're bad, and instead of seeing like we're all human and we all have ability to hurt people, but we also all have ability to entertain and to love and to all these things, and it's like a choice. And um yeah, I don't know, like I just feel like that really helped me. But I see what you're getting at with the whole philosophy of yoga. Like it definitely feels like in the translation from philosophy and in the move from of India from South Asia to the West,
Hmm.
it's like, which I guess is with everything that falls into the capitalist capitalist process or system. It's like it becomes it's like with pride too, that's become like rainbow washed. And like now all, if you look at all the logos, like June 1st, all logos now are rainbow. And it's like companies that are donating millions to anti-gay legislation. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's just falling into that like consumerist trap of like, yeah, we're marketing all these things that are palatable, but they're not necessarily really authentic and conscious, and there's not really like necessarily substance behind it. And yoga has become a trend, and very, very white. Like I, for the past many years, like especially since starting my PR business, I kind of took a step back from yoga. Like I still was teaching, but I wasn't really posting much about yoga. I was very like, I don't want to take up space. And this is not in any way for me to be like, oh my God, poor me. Like I'm not, no, not poor me. It was just more of like an awareness of like, I don't want to, like there are so many white yoga teachers. I don't need to take up space. And I'm not in a place right now where yoga is my main source of income. So I don't need to take up space. Whereas now I think I'm more, it is something that I'm feeling called to grow more and do more with. And so it's just having that awareness, but it is incredibly white, and it's kind of scary how white it is. And thinking about how, you know, when you take I don't know what your yoga teacher training was like, but a lot of them are, you know, often also all white people, and they don't bring anyone in from South Asia. And it's like, this is where it comes from. Like it has to be there. And also the Yoga Alliance, which is this, you know, this like meant to be a regulation piece of within the industry. But I've spoken to my yoga studio here in Lisbon, and they wanted to do a yoga teacher training, but they actively decided not to certify it through Yoga Alliance, because they're like, it's just a money making business in the West. It's like, why should this organization in the US decide the caliber of a yoga teacher training? And it's very new as well.
Yeah. I've also never been asked for my like proof that I paid for my Yoga Alliance like membership when I've taught at yoga studios. I've never had someone ask me for that, for like whatever like member number or whatever it is that they give you. I don't even remember. I stopped paying for that a while ago.
Yeah, I don't pay for any of those things either. It's like, I guess it's like similar to the coaching industry, that there's not like the same like regulation. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just something to be aware of, and we can do our part in trying to actively find and diversify our teachers, but also at the same time, you also go whatever studio you're going to, you know, as a student, maybe it's not as easy for you to necessarily seek that out if the studio isn't actively curating that. And I think it's an ongoing, like, I don't know what the answer is. And we as individuals need to do our best, but I feel like I'm sitting here taking up space as another white yoga teacher. Right. But I think it starts with awareness. And one of my clients, actually, I feel like she does this really well. She's a yoga teacher. We met on a yoga teacher training, and then she worked with me for PR. And she's very good at, like, in all of whenever I'd send her a PR opportunity or whatever, she'd always be really good at being like, actually, I know another yoga teacher who'd be better suited for this. And she would always pass the mic and really be like, you know, really, but what we also worked on was like her really owning like her kind of piece within it, because she was also kind of like, I don't want to take up space. And I'm like, you don't have to, but I think the very fact that you are so conscious is why you should take up space, because you will address these things and you will, you know, include other elements in the conversation, instead of just straight up being like, yeah, these are yoga poses that you can do for the stress or to sleep. You know, her conversation is what she's brought into the conversation is more about like how we in the West portray yoga and how much it alienates people from the practice, because we see contortionists doing these like splits on Instagram, or people doing handstands. And then of course, if you've never done yoga before, you're new to it, you're like, oh, it's clearly not for me, because I'm not thin, white, able-bodied, and I can't do that. And like, that's a big piece of her like messaging is around like, yoga is for everyone. It is designed for everyone. And if you really honor the roots of yoga, it is for everyone. And like, yeah, and using her platform to speak out against those things. So she's kind of gone viral talking about stomach taming yoga pants that like some brand promoted. And she's like, your stomach doesn't need taming. Like, not like what, like, It's just like so ridiculous, like some of these things. And that's where I'm like, okay, that, that is, I see her really embodying that like social justice piece of yoga philosophy.
That stomach taming thing like also kind of feeds into like the whole male gaze topic.
Yeah. And just diet culture, because of
Yeah.
course anything in the West gets sifted through this filter of like diet culture. Like, oh, do yoga because it's going to make you lose weight and be thin and beautiful and fit this body ideal that we're going to change in a year. So you're never going to meet it. It's ever changing.
I just looked at the time. We need to get into your story. Do you have a
This
call right after this?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'm good. This is so typical us. It's going to be like part one. Part two is going to be where the story is. Like really bury the lead. People listening will be like, I didn't sign up for this yoga conversation, but this is just what you get with us.
Yeah. I was also curious too, like what was your experience going to yoga classes as you were like questioning your own identity, or as you were starting to kind of really like accept who you really are and stuff?
Well, I mean, yoga has actually really helped me with my journey.
I've heard that a lot in these episodes. I love that.
Yeah. And is, I came out to myself on my first yoga teacher training. So for me, I think I've had a very positive experience with it, but it is true that like, I haven't met many other queer, or at least out queer people in my yoga communities, like, or in like the yoga teaching space. But it was kind of where I don't know. I mean, like I said, I haven't really thought about it much. Like, I think because yoga has been a part of my life for so long, I feel so at home there. But I think that's also because of my privilege. Like, it would be different if I identified in a different way, if I looked different, if I, was of a different race or whatever, it's like that. I think that's just really speaking from privilege. So I don't even want to take up time talking about it, because I've just been, yeah. I mean, it has been obviously nice if I did meet another queer yoga teacher, but it's not really, didn't ever really find that it was something we talked about. But at the same time, I also didn't feel like it was an issue in any way, in my experience anyway.
And then when you teach, do you ever like bring up that you're in partnership with a woman? Like,
I've never, but I actually was thinking about this. I'm teaching tomorrow, and I thought about it. I'm like, do I want to mention something about pride? I was like, how do I even bring that in? Because I'm open about it. And so whenever I'm chatting, because the community I'm part of now is a really beautiful, warm, friendly environment. So I'm always talking to students and stuff. And they, like, whenever I talk about it, like, I'll mention Raquel in conversation and stuff. So I don't feel like that's an issue. But, this is another piece too, is like, it's not that I feel like it's going to cause any issues or something. It's just, it is sometimes also annoying to come out all the time, and I do sometimes kind of just choose not to, like, it can just be like partner, blah, blah, blah. If it's just like one sentence and we're not really going to get into it. But then sometimes if we then end up talking about it for a little bit longer, then they'll be like, oh, like, what does he do? And you're like, no, it's like, it's kind of just something as a, like that's something I never really realized. It's like, you think, oh, the coming out is like this big, you do the thing and then you're done. And it's like, actually coming out is like a lifelong. And in certain situations you choose to do it. And it's not necessarily even that you choose not to do it because there's a danger, but because, I mean, again, speaking from a very privileged position, but sometimes you just can't like really be bothered to deal with the reaction of like, like that, like realization that someone has, and that you have to like hold space for that. Sometimes you're just like, I just don't, but then other times I notice I do just kind of, I want to just get it out of the way right away. But it's, I mean, it always plays a part. Like, something I think about sometimes that it's something I've been thinking about recently. So that's why I'm bringing it up is, because I've been living straight, I guess, for so long and had female friends and whatever, since I guess something I thought about recently, like since coming out, like now that I'm out and then have like female friendships and stuff, I don't notice that there's anything strange or anything different. But sometimes in the back of my head, I think it's just like my anxiety will be like, are they going to be uncomfortable talking about certain things? Are they going to be uncomfortable? You know, like that's an anxiety that comes up sometimes.
Yeah. Or like
You know,
going certain places, like me and my girlfriends like to go to Korean spas where you're like naked in front of each other.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. It's like, it's not really, because it shouldn't be an issue. And also like what I said with, it's a very patriarchal thing, this whole like objectifying women, you know, like I think that's what I found, like the attraction to women is so, I don't know, it's like it's like it's not the way that I'm like, you know, a stereotypical man would explain his attraction, because it's not this like, it's like there's just so much nuance to it.
It's not based on like surface level.
Yeah, these surface
like,
level, like these tick these boxes. Like I don't know, I think I saw a meme the other day that was something along the lines of like someone saying that they're attracted to this one specific thing, and then lesbians being like, well, I like all women and everything about them is just so amazing. And that's really true, that it's like you can just be like that's what I find, is you can just be like amazed by like all of these little subtle things, and like you just, you know, I find that my attraction to women is like so much more diverse. Like it's like I can see beauty in like all women, and that doesn't mean I'm like objectifying women. It's a very, I don't know, it feels like a very beautiful thing to be able to see people that way. And I guess like attraction to other genders is similar. It's just like really, and maybe that's a very bisexual thing, I don't know, but it's just like really seeing beauty in differences, and seeing beauty in in everyone.
I definitely relate to that too, because like if you put everyone I've ever dated like in a line, like there's no like type that I have, like everyone looks different, because I definitely relate to that, seeing beauty in like all the little differences that all humans have, in my experience.
yeah exactly. Like what makes someone attractive is not just like, oh, like they have these specific features, you know, like that's a conditioning, you know.
For me it's more of like a behavior thing. Like yesterday I was watching a YouTube video, and it was someone who's like within our age group, like millennial, and he was talking about something that Gen Zers talk about on TikTok called icks, which are basically like turn-offs. So I was years old when I found out what an ick was.
There's a great, I can recommend another podcast about it. It's like one of my favorites. It's not a queer or anything. It's two journalists, but they were talking about the ick like very extensively. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you've told me about that podcast.
Yeah. I clearly I'm like, they're my friends. Like one day I'll be on the podcast. I don't know what to talk about, but I really like them. But they were just talking about the ick. And it was because they were talking about Girls. Remember that show with Lena Dunham? And I recently rewatched it because they were talking about it, and they were just mentioning how, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but in the first few episodes, one of the main characters, she like kind of gets annoyed with her boyfriend, and they're kind of saying like that was like the ick before it became a term. She had the ick with Charlie. Like it was just like everything he did just was like a turn off. And it's like random things, like, you know, he's not actually doing anything wrong. It's a reflection on her just getting to a point where she's just like not interested in him anymore. And it was just really funny rewatching that with that in mind. I'm like, yeah, that is true. But what I've also noticed is that like the whole thing about the ick, a lot of people have also said that like it's maybe something that's worth kind of like reflecting on. Like, okay, is this actually the ick, or like are you just looking for excuses to not commit and not get intimate and not get vulnerable? Do you know what I mean?
I've seen something about like psychologists talking about it, saying it's like a fearful avoidant attachment style or something like that.
That sounds about right.
That makes a lot of sense, because they're using like things like, if he wears bell-bottom jeans, that's a no for me. And it's like, really? But like, what does that mean about who he is as a person? Just because he's wearing bell-bottom jeans? Like, okay. Your loss,
It's
I
like,
guess.
yeah, it's so funny. It's like the way he puts one strap of a backpack on his shoulder, like
Yeah.
ick. It's like, that's
Yeah.
not, but if you were actually in love with this person, like that wouldn't be a
Exactly.
deal
Yeah.
breaker. It's not like an actual deal breaker.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
That's
funny.
a very conditional way to love.
Yeah.
Um, let's get into your story.
Okay, let's do it.
How much time do you have? I want to honor your time.
I can go over.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Okay.
don't have anything after this.
Cool. Yeah, I don't have anything until like 1 p.m. and it's like 10 a.m. here. So this is
Okay,
like
cool.
my first thing of the day.
Nice. I get to start the day with you. Cool. I'm like, where do I start? Because this is the thing with the coming out story. It's like, I can start it when I started, realizing it. And then inevitably afterwards, I've then started looking, kind of reassessing my whole life and looking for all
Hmm.
the clues.
Hmm.
But I mean, it really started with me going on that yoga teacher training. So it was 5 years ago. In 2017, I was laid off from my job for whatever reason. My intuition was like, don't take any of these offers where I could go in and do the same thing somewhere else. And I didn't, I wanted to travel and go on a yoga retreat. That's what I really wanted to do. But I, being very conditioned, was like, I can't have a gap in my CV because then I'm not going to get a job when I get back, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, I'll do a yoga teacher training. I felt like I could justify that. And then I looked for one abroad and I was scrolling through. I found this one school yoga institute that has like tons of trainings all over the world. And I saw a picture of this woman sitting on a dock on the Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. And I was like, I want to go there. I want to sit there. And it was, and I remember then briefly being like, oh, wait, am I even qualified enough? Like, do I have enough experience? Blah, blah, blah. And I sent them a very vulnerable email with all of my concerns. And they just wrote back so compassionately. Like, it was so raw and real and authentic. And I just felt so held by it. I was like, I'm going to be safe here. Like, I felt like I could bring my whole self there.
Oh, I love
And
that.
so I remember it was like November 4th. So it was freezing. I'd like packed up all my stuff because I'd rented out my room. So I packed up all my stuff and just had this like backpacker backpack, and I had my new yoga pants that I bought and my like old trainers and like a little cardigan because I was like, I'm going to Central America, I'm not going to bring a jacket. And I was like standing at like 4 a.m. waiting for the bus and like dark rain in London. And I was like, what the fuck am I doing? I was like, oh my God. And so I flew to Guatemala, landed in Antigua, and then there I met, through the like the Facebook group that they created for us, I connected with a couple of girls who were also going. So we met in Antigua so we could travel together.
Nice.
To share, like take the shuttle together and then like
That's
split
fun.
a boat because you have to like take the boat across to where the mystical yoga farm is. So anyway, I feel like I'm detailing this way too much. I can go way too. It's like 3 weeks, so there's a lot to share. So anyway, long story short, it got there, and it was a very, it was this permaculture farm. There was no data, no Wi-Fi, so I was like not on my phone, and it was really immersive. We were waking up at 5:30 in the morning. Someone's job was to run with the chimes in the morning, and then we'd go down and meditate on the docks for half an hour. And then we'd go get ready for yoga, and we'd have a 2-hour yoga practice. And then we'd have breakfast, and then a spiritual lesson, which was always like this kind of discussion where we talked about like spiritual lessons and the philosophy and stuff like that. And then we'd have lunch. And then in the afternoon, it would be more like the physical asana practice, like adjustments and alignment and practice teaching and stuff like that. And then dinner in the evening, and then usually some kind of satsang in the evening. So like a fire ceremony, or like maybe we tried some yin yoga, or did a shamanic journey. Like we were exposed to like all these different things, like sound healing, because the way that they had formatted the yoga teacher training was around the Peruvian medicine wheel. So there was also a lot of shamanism woven into it, which I think was just really poignant. Because I think for me, I mean, as so many people talk about on the yoga teacher training, it really is much less about becoming a teacher. I mean, I just wanted to deepen my yoga practice. It really is this profound personal transformation.
Oh, I so agree. So
yeah,
agree.
it's like anyone who asks me, I'm like, do it. If you feel called to do it, do it. Like, even if you never teach, you're going to have, I mean, obviously, like assuming that the teachers and everything is good, but I think just the yoga practice in and of itself, like really committing to it and really going deep with it, it's just transformational.
Especially in a space where like you can't escape and they're like waking you up at 5, like you have no excuse but to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you're fully, like we barely had any, it was really just like in the lunch break. And then maybe the break after, you know, like after, like there was really didn't have much time that was free time. So you're really like fully in it, but all the practices you're doing are very much about being present. So yeah, you really are like thrown in at the deep end. And I think I really benefited from that. And as a result, there was a lot of like introspection. Obviously, I was doing a lot of journaling. And what was so refreshing was also like, you know, I have kind of a, like, typically when I talk to people, I like end up talking about how I'm Danish, I've lived abroad, like all these titles, like I was head of PR, like all these like status, like kind of markers that like, you know, would position you a certain way when you're engaging with someone. And there it was very much like people didn't even know I was Danish until like 2 weeks in or something. Cause we were just fully meeting each other there. Like, hi, I'm Maria. This is your name. And we're just, it was I think it was the first time that I was like social and was with all these people. And I was not leaning on any parts of my past or my status or like career or anything to like connect with people. It was purely just connecting on like being present and just being yourself. And I think that was just so incredibly healing to be seen and appreciated and like loved in that place. And I think that was what was so beautiful. And the teacher trainers did such a beautiful job of really holding space for that. Like it felt such a profound connection to everyone, you know. And we also did like all these exercises and everyone was really like open and all this stuff. Anyway, so there was one girl there who was sharing very openly about her attraction to women, her experience dating women in these like spiritual lessons. And I was very intrigued by her. And I found myself journaling about her a lot. And I was like, what is it? Why am I so drawn to her? Is it because I'm like jealous? Like, is it because I'm intrigued? And then I was like, I feel like there's this kind of like attraction. And then I was like, is it because there aren't really any men here? And I'm, you know, like just looking for a distraction. Like I really had all this time to just really process everything. And I basically realized after like 2 weeks, because that's the other thing, it was only a 3-week experience, but it was so immersive that it was, you know, a lot happened in a short amount of time. But I realized after 2 weeks, I was like, I'm in love with her. Like my heart was so open. Like there was no conditioning, none of these like fears and barriers. It was the purest experience of love I'd ever had. And it was so like, I was like holding space for myself. And like, there was no like, what was also interesting was I didn't begin to be like, what does this mean? What's my label? Like I didn't go down all those paths. It was purely, I could just be present with that experience of like, that is what this is. Yeah. And that's just what it is. I don't have to write a story about it or like make it mean anything else. That's just what it is. And that was just really like profound. And, you know, we did spend some time together, but she went back to the farm. Like we only spent a couple of days together, like after the training. And then I went solo traveling by myself. And I remember really like wanting to just continue being alone. Like I didn't, you know, when you travel, it's very easy. It's like almost hard not to meet people, but I was actively like going away from it because I just really wanted to like get to really connect to this part of myself. And it was interesting too, because I shared everything with the 3 women I shared. There are 2 other women that I shared my cabin with. And
so you told them this like realization that you had.
So I didn't tell them when we were on the farm together, but when I remember I was in Veracruz, I think. And I'd gone for a walk and I was sitting by the water, and then I decided to like send them a voice message. We had a little group chat where we were like staying in touch. And I shared with them. I was like, so there's this thing, I fell in love with her, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, what? How could you not tell us? Like you told us everything. But it was such a beautiful, supportive reaction as well. It was like, oh my God, Maria, your heart is so open, you know, because that's something we had talked about, that like, that was really the profound experience of just removing all the conditioning and all these layers and all this fear to just really feel how much like just basically an untapped source of love we are when we are connected to that oneness, you know, which is really the profound experience, I think. Mm-hmm. And that was just such a beautiful and really supportive way to, you know, for them to respond. They weren't like, oh, so are you a lesbian now? So are you this? It was just like, wow, Maria, your heart is so open and that's so beautiful. And the only thing was like, why didn't you tell us like sooner, you know, so we could talk more about it. And yeah, I mean, the reason why I also like, I knew that it was, I don't know, I don't really know how else to say it that other than I just felt so sure of it. And there wasn't really any fear around it, at least while I was traveling. And I was like, you know, I know had she invited me to like, I think she had wanted to go solo traveling in South America or whatever. If she had asked me, I was like, I was ready to literally just abandon my life, go with her. I did not like, I didn't care. Like, that's how like just open it was. And so I think it was really important that I had that time. And then I met up with my family in Florida and we had, well, they flew into Florida and we had like Christmas there. And I told my sister because we were very close and she was just really like excited and just shared the story with her. And I kind of just realized coming back, I was like, okay, I know I want to try dating women. Came back to London. It was kind of a shock coming back to London after this profound spiritual experience, like integrating. But I knew I wanted to date women. I think it took me like a month before I kind of created an account on this. There's this app called Her for queer women and non-binary people. And it was really refreshing to be on there. It was like everyone could like label themselves. I didn't put a label because I knew the tropes around bisexuality. And so I was like, my big fear was that someone was going to be like, oh, you're just bi-curious and you're just going to explore and whatever. Because I had a friend in college who I don't actually know how she identifies, but she had that experience with one of her friends. Like she was very in love with one of her friends. They would get together and then her friend would run back to her boyfriend. So I was like very aware of that. I was like, I don't want to do that. But at the same time, I'm like, I also like need to date and explore and, you know, whatever. And then, yeah, I just was like talking to women on there. And then actually the very first person I went on a date with was with Raquel, like official date with a woman. And she, you know, we got on really well and we just kind of kept talking, went on one other date with one other girl that like same week. And I still remember the first date with Raquel was so funny. I like, we were meant to meet Sunday and I had like gotten on the list to this gig Saturday night. So I was like, hey, you know, how spontaneous are you? And she's like, when and where? And it turns out that's like the most spontaneous thing she's ever done. It's so funny. She was just at her friend's place having wine. So that's why she had the liquid courage. But so we went to a gig the first night and yeah, we like went to Budapest on our second date because she had tickets and she was like, I'm going by myself. Do you want to come? And I was like, yeah, okay. But anyway, I won't go into like the whole meet cute of us, but
how long have you been together now?
It's 4.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. But I think what was so profound about the experience too was that I really, you know, not wanting it to be like my experience with men when I was younger, I was very like present and really like, I'm not going to do anything if I feel she wants to. So like hearing her side of the story is very funny because she's like, you didn't touch me. And I was like trying to give you all the signals, but you like didn't react. But I think it was because I was very like, you know, used to reading the signals of someone else and giving them like, oh, I can tell he wants to kiss me right now. So I'm going to, you know, I was like, no, I want to fully really listen to my body's signals and really be present with this experience. And so when we finally did have our first kiss, I think after like 2 weeks, it was like, you know, super electric and like the most amazing thing. And I was like, aren't you glad you waited? You know, but that was like the joke. And she had also been quite confused. But when I explained to her the why, she was like, oh, okay, I get it. But I was kind of scared, you know, because I knew from her profile that she identified as a lesbian. So I was scared that she was not going to take me seriously if I told her that. But I did tell her after 2 weeks, and then she was like, oh, well, I just thought you weren't into me, but now I understand. Like, this makes so much sense. Yeah. So then we started dating. I told my sister, I told some friends. And I think it was a kind of easier to come out having a girlfriend, because I could just be like, I have a girlfriend, instead of saying I am. I now identify as whatever.
Yeah.
Which I think, yeah, like that does make it easier. So I like went to Denmark and had planned to tell my dad and my family, but I don't know, it was scary, even though I didn't think that there was no reason for me to believe that they would not accept me, but it was just still very, very vulnerable. And so I think I'd told my sister, and then I'd gone out for lunch with her and the cousin. And then my cousin was like, oh, are you seeing anyone? And then it turns out like my sister kind of told her and was like wanting me to tell her, but she was very respectful about it. And I told her, and she was very excited. So it took me probably 6 months from like starting to date Raquel to telling my dad. Because my mom passed away 11 years ago, so I was with my dad and my sister. We went out for dinner, and my sister knew that was the dinner I was going to tell him. And we went to this place that had like, multiple courses. And so I remember it was like, first we got the wine. It's like, we had a liquid courage. And then the first meal, then the first, appetizer came, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna like arrive. And then that was taken away. My sister's like looking at me like, I'm like, I need to pee. And like, it was like, I was like, oh my God, I like did not want to do it.
It's funny how the like anticipation makes something like that, like any difficult conversation, feel worse.
Yeah, it was
like the longer you wait, the harder it is.
Yeah. It's like you should just rip off the Band-Aid, but it was just And but but it was nice to have her there and have her support. But I remember because in Danish, you use a term, I guess that's equivalent to like partner, so it's not gendered. So I just said, okay, I have something to share. I have a partner, I have a new partner. And then I just said, her name is Raquel. And my dad, without skipping a beat, was like, oh, where's she from? Like, he was so smooth. I was like really, really, really pleasantly surprised. Like, I didn't think there would be anything negative, but I didn't know he would be so, supportive right away, or so like engaging right away. And I was like, yeah, she's Spanish, blah, blah. And then it was kind of like, that was kind of it. There was nothing really. And then I felt that like, okay, it could have easily just carried on and talked about something else. Like, I'd done it. But I remember wanting to be like, no, okay, I really want to also honor my dad and thank him for being supportive. And so I was just, I paused and I said that. I was like, hey, I just want to say, like, I really appreciate you being so like open and warm, and it was scary to say this and whatever. And he was just like, well, I guess I get it. You've had male partners in the past, and now you're dating a woman, and you just love people. And I was like, that's so cute. I was like, that's so sweet. I was like, that's such a beautiful explanation of my sexuality, Dad. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I have tears in my eyes.
Yeah, it was really sweet. And then he was just like, but then he was very concerned with like, okay, but can I tell people? Like, do you want to tell people yourself? I'm like, no. Like, you, like my sister and my dad, like, you were the people I wanted to say it. I don't really want to have to come out to everyone else. So I was like, feel free to spread the word, which was, kind of
like
nice.
To do it. Okay. Like to do it for you. Okay.
Yeah. Or to just mention like, oh, she has a new partner. Because I didn't really feel like I had to actively come out to everyone else. Yeah. Because I think that's also like a lot. Yeah. I guess it's also different for everyone, but those were the people I really wanted to come out to personally. And Raquel was also so supportive about the whole process. Like, she was very like, don't feel like you have to just because you're dating me, or like, when I was like, oh, I'm going to do it. And she's like, if you're not ready, like it's a process, And I think because I had this feeling of like, oh, it's so like, I'm already like, I was 27, I felt like I came out so late. I had a lot of like shame around that. And like, wanting to make up for lost time. And she's like, it takes some people years before they've even accepted themselves and stuff, you know, like, she's like, you did it really fast. You were like, okay, I'm going to come out to myself. Okay, I'm going to start dating women. Okay, I got a girlfriend. Okay, now I'm going to come out. Like, it was like, boom, 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 like very fast. But what was really nice with my family was they didn't need to, but a lot of them individually reached out to me and were just like, hey, you know, I hear you have a new partner. That's so great. I'm so happy for you. We look forward to meeting her. And it was just like, really, like, I was really kind of
nice.
Yeah, I was struck by how warm and how they really went out of their way to make sure that I knew I was accepted and I was loved, and that my partner was welcome, and she really has been like adopted into the family, which has been really, really nice. So again, like, I didn't expect anything bad, but it like overwhelmed me how positive they were, which was just like, you know, again, it's also privilege, but it was also just really nice.
Mm-hmm. That's so amazing how your family members went out of their way to call you. I think that's a good step to take, I think, because like trying to like imagine how hard it was for you to come out to your dad and your sister. It's almost like they recognize that and they're like, let's reach out to her. I want her to give support. I want to give her support because maybe she's feeling like I'm going to judge her. So yeah, I love that.
It was really sweet. It was really sweet. Like, even I have this like kind of bonus set of grandparents. They're not biological, but like known them my whole life. So they are like my grandparents. And that grandma, I remember we were talking and she was very like, she was almost like upset that I hadn't told her, because she was like, oh my God, I can imagine it would have been so hard for you. And you were all alone with it and you didn't tell me. And then she was very sweet, but she was like, you know, when they fled from Hungary, and she's like, so they lived in Copenhagen when they were younger. They moved there when they were like 20, I think. And they're like, you know, we used to have a lot of gay friends when we lived in Copenhagen. You know, it was just like really, it was just really sweet. It's just like, you know, she's like in her 80s now. And it was just, that was also very, like, very sweet. So yeah.
It's interesting to see how some parts of Europe are definitely more open. Like my family comes from Germany. Most of my family is from there. And yeah, they're more open than here in America. But what you said too about coming out too late. It's interesting because people come out way later. I have a family member who came out in her 70s.
God, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, we were like, wow, cool. And also a lot of things make sense now.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, that's the other piece, which, you know, we probably won't have time to get into, but it's like, there are so many, I look back on my life and I'm like, and that was a clue, and that was a clue. And like, then I also realized all the moments when, like, you know, I also remember dating in my early 20s, like on OkCupid, putting my thing to bisexual, and sometimes doing that with Tinder, but like, it's like, I never acted on it. And that was something that, like, in this book about, like, written by the bisexual writer, they talk a lot about that as well. Like, not like having this queer, like, kind of impulse, or like, you know, like knowing it's there, but then not like repressing it and not really acting on it. And I think also a big thing that was so confusing for me is just, again, talking about representation, but like the only women you'd see like having any kind of romantic relationship, it was either like a butch lesbian, which it's not how I identify, or it's not what I look like, or it was like, you know, an American Pie, and there's like straight girls making out because you know, for the male gaze, because it's like, you know, so it's almost like, it's not like, the attraction between women is almost like not taken seriously.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a big thing.
She's just experimenting.
Yeah.
She's like going through a phase.
Yeah. She's going through a phase, and like, it's not you know, and I think that's why I also really was dismissive of it within myself. I was like, well, and also, you know, it's a lot easier to just function as straight, right? Like, and I could, because I'm like, well, I'm attracted to men, so I could just do that. That would make my life like easier, but it's not, you know, it's not fully me. Like, I didn't realize how much that was impacting my self-expression and my sense of true belonging and connection to people until I was out. You know, like, it affects, because it is, you know, like, that's why when people talk about you know, when they're like, oh, it doesn't really matter, and like, you know, who cares and whatever, like with bisexuality, that's something I feel like people say a lot, like, no, it's like, it doesn't really matter. But I'm like, but it also does. Like, it doesn't matter in the sense that like it shouldn't be an issue, but also it is a real identity. And it's interesting that it features so prominently in the acronym. And yet it's so like,
yeah,
not really considered, because it is a different experience than if you are, a lesbian versus being trans or being a gay man, or, it is a unique identity. And the joke, apparently, which I've learned recently in the bisexual community on TikTok and stuff, is like all these random things becoming bi culture, like, oh yeah, cuff jeans, bi culture. And it's like, it's almost because like we're so desperate for there like to be a culture around us, so that we're just like, well, like, just adopt the things. Layered necklaces, oh, bi culture, like, because there isn't any, there aren't like these same cultural things. There's just like, oh yeah, you're a slut, you're not to be trusted, you're like, those are like these kind of negative tropes around us. And it's like, just because I am not my attraction to people isn't limited by gender doesn't mean I want to sleep with everyone the same way that like if you're attracted to just one gender, that doesn't mean you want to sleep with all the people, like all men. It's like, it's such a ridiculous concept, which is why I think it's just like very misunderstood. So I feel like I could talk about this for a long time, and I'm also still like just learning so much. Yeah, I think I've spoken enough.
with the learning piece too, and like how you're still learning, and how you mentioned that you have this like extra set of grandparents where the grandmother was like, you were alone with this, and we had a lot of gay friends. I think those two things, with like learning and discovering that they had friends within the community, I think there's also an aspect, or maybe like a responsibility of parental figures, to have more conversations about, these are all the types of humans that there are, and like you might identify with one of these, or like this is these are the ways that you can, like, a prince can love a prince, a prince can love princes and princesses, a prince can decide he's not a boy, or he's also not a girl, or they are also not a girl. And I think that would be the next step that we can get to as a society of like parents. I think that's definitely probably happening with most of Gen Z, and even within millennials, but I don't know, I can only speak for myself and the people that I know living here in Los Angeles, which is like super liberal. That like, I know that when my husband and I have kids, like we're definitely going to be open and talking to them about all the different types of identities and all of that, because I think that's important to know, instead of
because it's, you don't like, and that's the thing that I think maybe some people don't realize about representation, not to like bang on about it, but it's sometimes you don't know how you identify until you see it, because you don't think it's an option. You know what I mean? Like, if you're like, I had that experience with like a friend who was like, thought they were a lesbian and then realized they're actually trans, but it wasn't until they met other trans people and saw them represented that they realized that. So it's like, you have to like, that's, you need to know what the options are. The same way, like, I mean, when we decide what we want to do with our lives and all these things, like, we don't know something's possible until someone shows us that it's possible. And then you feel like, oh, that feels like something for me, and it's such an innate thing, but like we're so conditioned by society and the way it teaches us to behave and stuff. And so we have to see these things modeled, which is why LGBT, education in schools is so important, and why like the Don't Say Gay bill and all these things are so dangerous, because it's like, I don't know, I feel like I get the impression that conservatives are like, oh, you're gonna condition people to be gay, and it's like, no, you're literally just gonna be like, look, so some families look like this, some families have two dads, some families have two moms, that's LGBT education. And it's not just like in sex ed, it's also like in math problems, instead of it always being heteronormative, including it there, just to like normalize it, you know?
Yeah. 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 So that kids don't carry around the same hate and judgmentalness. And honestly, it all goes down to fear. They don't carry around that same fear that these older generations, like they're also just like a victim of their own conditioning.
Because
You know?
what I always go back to, or like I just don't understand, is like, why do you care? Like, why do you
Yeah,
care
exactly.
who I date, how I dress? Like, it's
Exactly.
such a it like
Especially
it
because
literally
like
baffles
as
me.
uh-huh. Especially because like as a straight person, I don't have to go around being like, I love men. I love men to everyone. And like this is what I like to do in the bedroom, by the way, just so that you know. And
Yeah,
if you agree with that, then we can be friends, right? You know, like
it's so
but if you don't
ridiculous.
follow that, what you called, did you say it was compulsory? I wrote it down.
Compulsory
Compulsory
heterosexuality.
compulsory heterosexuality. Like
I
if
think you
you
can say comp het as like a short, like the same way you would say cis het men.
it's a lot of syllables.
Yeah, I know, comp het. I think it's like coined in the 80s, something like that,
Okay.
by a feminist writer, I think.
Yeah, if you fall within that, like you're fine to go through life. But if you don't, and you know, that's also the answer to, because you're not the first person that's told me like how annoying it is that like you basically have to come out every single day of your life to every single person you meet. And the answer to stopping that is to educate people that like these are all the types of families that exist. These are all the types of identities that exist, so that we stop walking around making assumptions about people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And even
it's like we
even
assume
within
all the time.
mhm, even within like gender, like I've told my husband before, I'm like, you know, when we get pregnant, I don't want to tell my our family like what gender our baby is, because if our baby is a girl, they're going to be buying her all this pink stuff and like all this like quote girl stuff, and like same
Mm,
for boys. So like I told him, I'm like, I don't want to find out the gender. Now I kind of do. But I don't want to reveal it to people because I want them to get me like things that are like neutral colors that like anyone can
mm,
wear, that isn't like pushing a certain standard or this is how you have to be on our kids.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, because it's, like like kids pick up so much, like it baffles me. Like it's
Yeah,
also
they're
amazing.
so
Like kids pick
wise.
up things in the womb. They pick up things before
Yeah.
they even speak. Like
Yeah.
those first like few years are so formative. They just see
Yeah.
how you react to things and your behavior and your mannerisms. So it's like, and when you ask children, it's the same. Like I always like think about that when it comes to veganism and stuff. Like eating meat is learned behavior,
Yeah.
right? Like if you ask a kid like, oh, you're going to go eat that duck, they're going to be like, no, that's a live cute
Mm-hmm.
little duck, and it's like a similar thing of like they're taught hate,
Mm-hmm.
they're taught
Yeah.
that.
But they're born already with love. They don't need to be taught it.
Mm, yeah, yeah, exactly.
They don't
So
need
it's like
to.
it's all conditioning. So yeah,
I've loved this
that's the conclusion.
conversation.
There's a
Thank
lot
you
of
so
conditioning.
much. Yeah, I'm like, I sense that too. I'm like, that's a great spot to end it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Maria. This was a
No, my
lovely
pleasure.
conversation. Let's share how to find you online and how to find your work and all of that fun stuff.
Yes, so I'm at Be Conscious PR on Instagram. I also have my personal / yoga profile, which I don't update very much. But if you do want to connect with me on there, that's at maria.eilersen. And then finding out about how I work with people in PR is all on my website, beconsciouspr.com. I both have long-term coaching partnerships and I also have one-off sessions. And I am always a DM away or an email away. I love connecting with people. So even if anything resonated or you just want to say hi, please send me a message.
Awesome. I also want to ask you for the link to your article that you said you were writing,
Yes.
and a few other
Yes.
things that I wrote down. And then I'm just remembering now, do you still have a little time? Like 10 minutes? Okay, cool. There's some questions that I like to ask at the end of podcast episodes now that I wasn't doing the last time I had you on.
Okay.
So The first one is, what does self-love mean to you?
That's hard. Self-love. I think it's acceptance of who you are. And yeah, and then I guess the obvious is loving yourself, but I think it really is, and it starts with an acceptance.
Mm-hmm. And then finish this phrase. The way to my heart is
food.
Same.
Or I should say more specifically chocolate, but yeah.
And then when do you feel most alive?
I think when I'm singing.
Ooh, you don't share
Like
that on
really,
Instagram.
No, I don't.
Maybe that's the next level of your expression online.
Yeah, probably. I've done a few open mics in London before I moved here, and I've been wanting to do something here, but I haven't done it yet.
Nice. Is that the gig that you said you and Raquel went to?
No. That wasn't an open mic. That would be a lot like first date. Hey, come watch me sing.
Yeah, you'd have to be
Although my
huge extrovert for that.
Yeah. Although my singing teacher did tell me that she would do that in London sometimes if she wanted to impress a guy. She would like, oh yeah, I'm performing at this gig, and she's like, it always works. It's like, well,
come watch me perform for the male gaze.
Yeah. And she's an incredible singer too. But yeah, she did. Like Raquel has come to see me though for open mics, and she did quite early on as well, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's something that it's on my list of things that I want to do more of.
Yeah. And then last question specifically for this month. I want to know what your favorite part is about being queer.
I love this question. I feel like I want to think about it. Honestly, I think I love the freedom. Like I love all the different ways it can be expressed. Like I love the diversity of it. And the longer I'm out for, the more I can't imagine ever going back to, in the closet and pretending to be straight. Like it's just such a beautiful, it's a beautiful community, and it's beautiful, these different ways to identify. I think it makes the world, not to be cliche, more colorful, but it's just, I don't know, just there's so many ways to be and express. And I get so excited whenever I see anyone else expressing that. And if anything, I want to express that more. It's why I started dyeing my hair different colors. I was like, it's this beautiful freedom, I think, to just be seen as who you are and be all the magic that you are.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you again so much for being on Openly Spoken for a third time.
My pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Openly Spoken. I know that there's an abundance of content online, so I really appreciate you giving me your ears today. If this episode shifted something for you, please share this with a friend or write us a podcast review if you're listening to this on iTunes so that more people can find this. If anything shifted for you from this episode that you want to have a conversation about, I would love to hear from you. Just send me a DM over on Instagram at selfexpressbabe, and that is in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.